What if the trees built up resistance and just stopped growing? Or the rivers formed a front line and just stopped flowing? There's no amount of intellect that justifies lack of respect. The power on this planet, man, it's time for us to redirect. What we take for granted to face and underhand it won't get us to tomorrow for much more than you can stand. The want for everything, it's really getting old. The more you buy, the more the time gets sold. But I'll talk and teach and act and reach the masses with my
Visiting has always been important to Indigenous peoples. Through visiting, we share stories, strengthen kinship, and learn from one another. It allows us to build and maintain respectful relationships in a way that uplifts Indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing. I'm Matt Dunn, Senior Strategic Officer, Indigenous Engagement at the University of Saskatchewan. Today, we are honored to be meeting on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis, in the hopes of learning about the research going on here, and to share stories and to appreciate and honor our interconnectedness. Dr. Holly Graham is a member of the Thunderchild First Nation, an associate professor at the USask College of Nursing, a registered nurse, and a registered doctoral psychologist with an active practice. She holds the Indigenous Research Chair in Nursing, awarded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, and the Canadian Nurses Foundation. Her research is strengths-based, with a focus on Indigenous health, mental health and wellness, and advancing reconciliation through nursing practice, education, research, and administration. Thanks for joining us. Well, Holly, thank you for being with us today. It's great to get to spend some time with you. Well, I'd love to get right into talking about your research. So can you tell me, what do you research and what are the big questions that you are tackling?
I do strength-based research, so really looking at what's working in communities and then finding ways to augment that. So I'm not really looking so much as answering questions, and I'm more focused on intervention type research, so community-based participatory action research, so doing things with the participants who are going to be impacted by the outcomes of the research. Particularly when we talk about Indigenous health, I feel that we have more than enough data that shows the health disparities. We also have enough data, publications, and oral anecdotes from our Gaitayak and our elders as to what needs to be done. So I just feel that for me, that's really my passion and my calling, is to be working at intervention and making changes, and hopefully some of them result in policy changes. I was recently awarded the Indigenous Research Chair by CIHR, SHERF, and the Canadian Federation, Nurses Federation. And that really is to advance Indigenous health and well-being provincially, and looking at all areas of practice of nursing, practice, teaching, administration, and research.
So which communities are you working with and what projects do you have on the go?
Well, right now I'd say broadly two communities. One is the university community, specifically within the College of Nursing, and with that I've been awarded Indigenous Research Chair. And I'm focusing on mentorship and reconciliation. As we know, there is no blueprint, as it has not been done within the institution, specifically in the College of Nursing, is that if we want to meet the calls to action to graduating more nurses and having more Indigenous peoples within healthcare positions, then I really feel that there's some changes we could do that would really assist with recruiting, retention, and then sustaining our Indigenous peoples who want to work in healthcare. The other one, there's three other communities. In one other community I'm working, it's a public safety grant, and it's with crime prevention. It's called Nehe-Wichitawin, and it's Cree helping Cree. And that one is in Little Pine and the Poundmaker First Nation here, which are located by North Balford. And what's really exciting about that is the two elders who approached me 2 years ago both attended residential school with my mother. And so they knew me and they said, "We know you, we know your family, we know where you come from, we want you to write this grant for us." So I am the only researcher, and I submitted with two 80-year-old elders. And so they had this plan, and I just wrote it up. And so we were awarded $2.5 million, and that's the one we're working on. And probably one of the unique perspectives, is not unique in the sense, but we're using culture as the intervention. So we're working primarily with youth 10 to 19-year-olds and with their families. And one of course, culture's intervention includes all levels of culture, from the elders, the Gaitayak, to the language. But one of the aspects of it that is unique is looking at our traditional restorative justice processes and looking at bringing that back into our school system. So training teachers, principals, community members, agencies as to use this when our young people are getting into difficult situations. So really looking at getting to the root of what's driving that behavior and providing support to help navigate to have better outcomes.
We're visiting with Holly today next to the South Saskatchewan River with Elder and Councillor Brian Tatusis of Poundmaker Cree Nation.
Well, it's a very interesting initiative. It's a 5-year program. We're working with all of our elders and our students, teachers, families, dealing with truth, dealing with to encourage the whole issue of law and order to some degree, where we're going to advocate between Little Pine and Poundmaker, the students that are 9 to 19 to be more, I guess, in tune to making good decisions regarding law and order in this country.
Austin Tatusis and late Jacob Pete approached me because they both attended residential school with my mother, and they approached me specifically because they knew who I was and my family. And they were really so excited about this project, and they said, but we only have 4 weeks to write it, so we need you to write it, put it together. So it was kind of like, you know, connection through relationships and whatnot. I think the second part that is really, I'm so excited about is it's using culture as an intervention. So it's really about reclaiming, rebuilding indigeneity, indigenousness. And one of the elements in this project is using traditional restorative justice processes. So that's actually what the training that's occurring today in the school that Brian's talking about is restorative justice practices. And to bring that, revive that in the communities, and really looking at getting to the root of the issue of the behavior, and then hoping that that's part of diversion from going into the justice system. As Brian said, what we really want is to keep the youth in our communities in school longer and to pursue, you know, their dreams, whatever that may be. But we have this legacy of colonization, and that's imprinted big footprints in our communities. And as we know and aware of, culture was one of the first things that was removed, and that is the foundation of this project.
It's justice, it's sentencing circles, it's to do with courts, it's to do with a lot of things. You got my interest. And I told Holly then that I will do the best I can to support this program from the first step to the last step.
Can you tell me about the idea of culture as intervention and how nursing plays a role?
Well, when we look at the history of colonization in Canada and we look at what has been eroded, it's primarily the culture, and that's what was most impacted, which means our identity, our ways of being, and in every way that we've constructed our world, our worldview. That's what was and has been eroded with colonization. I speak specifically to the residential schools, the 60 scoops, and even our current children in care. So when we look at what was removed and we look at the restoring of our indigeneity, reclaiming and rebuilding our indigeneity, that is very much anchored on culture. When I engage in research, it's about having a relationship. It's very different from, I think, the origins of research, which was much more helicopter-like. You drop in, take the information and leave, and you don't see the people again. So it's about, I've been visiting with Austin Tatusis for about probably 5 years. And so when they wanted to write this grant, then he contacted me. So it's about relationships as opposed to which college that I'm currently a part of. When you're talking about this type of research, it's about me being very comfortable that I don't have all the answers, but I can work with people, and together we can co-create what works best at this time right here, right now. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's one of the approaches I take that is very different, but it's also very time consuming. I am not the expert. I'm merely facilitating the expertise.
What are some of the challenges of conducting research and building relationships when it comes to the constraints of academia?
I would say time. When we look at academia and we look at our current system for tenure promotion, even the merit, it's about deliverables. And our Cree way, it's about relationships, and it's about relational ways of interacting. And there are no deliverables because it's a relationship, right? You know, within our academic setting. So many of our ways of sharing knowledge, I think as Indigenous scholars, what we prioritize is not necessarily what all institutions, not just the University of Saskatchewan, if we're just looking at academia in general. But I think there's some change. I'm really proud to say that our college in nursing have been on the committee to look at the tenure and promotion standards, and we've added some components to it that actually allow for other ways other than a publication to, I suppose, to validate other ways of sharing knowledge and knowledge dissemination.
If you've been raised to have more of a community-focused mindset, can you speak a bit more about those conflicts that are there?
Maybe I'll tell you a story. When I finished my PhD, one of the Giteic, the elders who I had talked to, you know, going to a sweats and going, you know, because my wellness plan is very much, you know, like what we're taught. It's physical, mental, emotional, but also spiritual. And so I'd go with sweats and visit with him. And so when I was done my PhD, I met him in North Balfour at the Tim Hortons, and he's sitting beside me, and he looks and he goes, "I'm so glad we're done our PhD." And I looked at him and I thought, this is perfect. He feels he was on this journey, and he feels that he was a part of it. That's what we need to replicate, when community feel that they're a part of it, and that it's not just, you know, I'm the doctor, it's my PhD. It made me feel very good. And I thought, how would someone else respond to that? You know, might they say, no, it's mine, I did all the work? You know, because we know when people are successful, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, they did not do it alone, you know, and I think that that's the difference. Is we, you know, we're at a point now where we're looking at stretching epistemology, and that's what we're doing with integrating Indigenous worldviews, making space and place for other knowledge systems. We have to do that. You know, if we're truly going to be what the world needs, we have to know and recognize and understand and accept that there's more than one way to view the world in which we live in. And that's just part of that. So it's really hard to give up a dominant process that has worked effectively for a long time, but recognizing that change is necessary actually if we want to look at health for all people and we want to reduce health disparities. Okay, this piece of pie has to be distributed differently. And so that's the challenge. But if you look at the reasons we need to do it and have to do it, is we are only 5% of the Canadian population, but when you look at the health disparities and the impact it has just personally on the individual who's experiencing it, but you look at the rates of Indigenous peoples incarcerated, you look at our healthcare disparities, look at just dialysis in this province, you look at how many children we have in care, it does affect the overall wellness of every Canadian because of resources that are being redistributed in the manner that they are. And I think that's what it comes down to, and there's been studies, research collected, and Indigenous peoples will say that consistently. They would rather be treated with respect than have someone to know aspects about their culture. And when we're looking at healthcare provision and we're looking at the inequalities of health, that's all Indigenous people want, is to be treated with respect and to be included in their treatment plan and to have access to all options for treatment and not to be made to feel less than, right? That's what is really important here. We don't need for everyone to know our culture to create positions here for us to have opportunities to be involved in decision making at every level of a university structure. It does not matter whether my colleagues know how to pray, know how to smudge. It's, are they making room for me? When we look at reconciliation, it's like any relationship. We have to see what has happened in the past, even though you and I didn't actively participate in many of the things and the atrocities that have happened. We've inherited this. And we can only begin to understand the history when we really start deconstructing the history. And our country was founded on the doctrine of discovery, which is a racist document in itself. So I think it's really important that not only all Canadians, but that everyone have the opportunity to study, you know, critical race theory and to understand how this has been constructed. And it's really a huge component of understanding identity. So that was one of the greatest priorities when I received the chair, to start the funding for that. So I've provided 2 different sessions of training for that for the College of Nursing and extended out to all of the health sciences and to U of R and Sask Polytechnic. And I did not provide the training. I partnered with the Saskatoon Anti-Racist Network, which has been mentored by Dr. Verna St. Dennis to do that. And we have more training coming.
Well, it's been so good to see Verna's work finally start to get recognized, because she's impacted so many people's lives in such a positive way. Mm-hmm. You finally start to see kind of society catch up to being ready to at least start those discussions. I remember even a couple of years ago, before the Black Lives Matter movement started, like, I'd be hesitant to even bring up the word racism, even though it affects us so much in our day-to-day lives, but also the work that we do on campus. So yeah, it's good to hear that that's a big component of the work that you're doing.
Well, we can't name it, we can't tame it, right? So if we can't talk about those words and deconstruct, then we're not as likely going to be able to make a difference.
How did you come to the profession of nursing, and how did you make the jump to then become a researcher?
I never wanted to be a nurse. My mother was a certified nursing assistant for 23 years, and it was her dream for one of her daughters to be a nurse. So I graduated really early. I actually wanted to go to be an RCMP and go into law. I wanted to be a judge. But I was too young when I graduated. So she said, and I used to faint when I got needles. So I thought, well, there's no way I can be a nurse. So I went into nursing, convinced I would fail out about Christmas time when you had to start giving a needle. And I found it's much easier to give than receive. I had no problem giving a needle. But I have to say, in reflection, that it's been a wonderful career, and I'm glad that I did go down that path, because it really provided me that opportunity to understand wellness and to have that biomedical teaching, the strong sciences, anatomy, physiology, and microbiology, and understanding, pharmacology, and looking, that combined with how I was raised. So it's been a really good fit. In terms of becoming a researcher, when you join, when you do a master's and whatnot, that's when I was first introduced to research. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the visiting and getting to know people. I actually really enjoyed it. And then with the PhD, I looked at mental health and wellness and looked at basically what was making a difference, what helped. And so I was looking from a strength-based, and I did more visiting. And I did both those research studies in my community, Thunderchild First Nation. And what I realized as a researcher is you get to share very intimate parts of people's lives that it's actually a real privilege. And it's actually, in a way, it's an honor that someone else trusts you with their narrative, their story, their experiences. And I really enjoy that. And then I enjoy taking that story and using it to promote health and wellness, to help other people. So I did an undergraduate psychology degree when I did my Bachelor of Science, because I was always fascinated by psychology. And then I was nursing in the States, and I worked specifically psychiatric nursing. And that was when I really felt and saw the importance of how we feel mentally impacts our physical wellness. So we could do everything perfectly physically, but mentally, if we're not attending to that, we're not as likely to do other things that keep us healthy. So that was a real shift. And I decided after working in the States that I wanted to become a psychologist. I actually did my own trauma work. And when it really changed how I felt, I used to be embarrassed to be, Indian, because I grew up with a lot of racism in rural Saskatchewan. So I was embarrassed. And then when I became educated, initially I was angry. I was just outraged at the history, like, how is this possible? And how is this possible that we're not taught this? And then I would say then it's pride, so it's like I'm proud of who I am, and I think of my ancestors, my mother, and I think of all of them with a real sense of pride of how the tenacity they had, how they survived with basically unbelievable odds not in their favor, and they survived. So I think personally it was a real journey from shame to anger to pride, and and that's where I am now.
Well, that is a great place to end today. Thank you so much for visiting today and just sharing your experiences. It's been really, really great to chat with you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Hi, hi.